נמצאת איתי על הקו שיימא אלבלושי מאיחוד האמירויות מדובאי, והיא פעילה פמיניסטית. הרעיון יערך באנגלית, בהמשך אתם תוכלו למצוא אותו מתורגם בעמוד הפייסבוק שלו. And I want to say good evening, שיימא. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can I call you a feminist activist from the UAE? Yes?
Yes, I urge you to do so. Thank you.
So I'm calling you that. So first of all, Sיימא, I will start with maybe the most obvious question. Could you imagine this kind of conversation happening a year ago between someone from the Emirates to someone from Israel?
I mean, definitely not. And it's still something that takes me by surprise every day. Like every day I wake up and I'm like, oh, we've normalized with Israel. And it still takes me by surprise.
It's amazing. I think it took by surprise. I think that one of the most, and I will tell you personally from my perspective, that one of the most amazing images that we're watching here is when we started seeing tourists coming from Dubai and from Abu Dhabi and walking on the streets in Israel and, in Tel Aviv especially. And I think that this kind of image, I couldn't imagine it. Can you explain to me a little bit about how the process was accepted in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, among the Arab society and among the Arab world?
To answer that question, you need to understand the UAE society. Mm-hmm. And I can't say that this is accepted by everyone still. I know that some of us are still trying to come to grasp with the idea that, we are now normalized with Israel. A lot of us are still very much concerned with, the occupation and what this means for Palestine. Mm-hmm. Others have ultimate trust in the leadership and what the leadership has decided to do. But clearly, many of those who are very happy with what's happening are the ones who are going there, are the ones that are visiting, and are the ones that you see on social media. But the others, more or less, try to simply trust the government and what it decides on.
You mentioned the occupation, and you mentioned the Palestinians. It's needless to say that for the Palestinians, the normalization with Israel, between Israel and the UAE, was not accepted, let's say, in a friendly way. The Palestinians are feeling that that the Arab world forgot the Palestinian issue, that it's off the table, that it's more important to normalize the relationship between Israel and the Arab world than to basically get to an end or put to an end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And from your perspective, do you feel that too was in the Arab world, in the UAE, did it people are saying, okay, we had enough with the Palestinian conflict. It's about time that we will worry about us. It's about time that we will start normalizing our relationship with the rest of the world. And maybe it's not all about Palestinians and Israelis.
Yes, that is a common sentiment here. I will not shy away from that. There are Emiratis who do believe so. However, I think that if we want to talk about regional peace, we cannot talk about it without addressing Palestine, clearly. Mm-hmm. And I, for myself, am very much an advocate for Palestine, and I stand very strongly against the occupation. But I do see that there might be a way in which we could benefit from normalization for the Palestinians.
What did you learn about Israelis, or maybe what are the stereotypes that were broke when you got to know Israelis for the first time?
Honestly, this is a very precious story to me. The first time I actually encountered an Israeli who impacted my life was through Twitter. Mm-hmm. There was this Twitter account called New Voice from Israel, صوت جديد من إسرائيل. And through this, I met a lot of left-wing Israelis who were very much for peace, for tolerance, for anti-occupation. I never knew that. Before that, the perception was Israelis are all for the abuse of human rights. They're for what's happening. But then you realize that a lot of Israelis just want peace too. And if I hadn't come across this account on Twitter, whom I'm now very close friends with the owners, I would not have known this side of Israel, to be honest.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit from the perspective of Israelis. You know, most of the Israelis, it's been a dream for them to go to Dubai, to visit Abu Dhabi, you know, the buildings, the different culture. But I think that most Israelis don't understand, and me as a Muslim Arab and you as an Arab Muslim, you know, most of Israelis, Jewish, don't understand exactly the Arab culture. What do Israelis need to know when they get to the UAE, what to do and don't do when you go to visit Abu Dhabi and Dubai?
This is actually quite funny because I have a lot of friends who are visiting, and I found that they're following very extreme measures. Like I have friends who would refuse to use their hands to point at something, and I'm like, this is an Arab world. We use our hands for everything. I don't know who told you that.
It's so right.
But yeah, I would say the only thing that Israelis need to consider when they come here is that we are a very conservative society in terms of how we behave in public and how we speak. You know, like criticism of leadership, criticism of iconic figures is not something we welcome here, as well as being openly racist or sexist. We do not accept that here as well. Other than that, I feel like people can come here and be themselves, honestly.
So you opened it as a feminist activist and as a Muslim woman to another Muslim woman. Does feminism and UAE go together? Arab world and feminism go together these days?
It's interesting that you bring this up because it's actually a question I receive a lot as a very vocal Emirati feminist. The UAE is very unique with how it does feminism. We have what you call state-led feminism. So a lot of our policies, a lot of our feminist activities are actually by the government. I would say the government is definitely more proactive with feminism than society. You know, the majority of the society is still very conservative. They're not very accepting to certain policies that the government comes up with. I mean, only a couple of months ago, the UAE passed a law that basically made pay equal between men and women in the UAE. And while many celebrated this, many also were very upset about it because they believe that, you know, this encourages more women to work outside the household, and this more or less affects the balance of gender roles. But as you can see, the government went with it despite the social norms.
You know, you're basically taking part in a new organization, right? You're launching a new feminist, women feminist organization in the UAE. This is, I think, I can say that this is groundbreaking, right?
Actually, we've had many, but once again, they're state-led. We've had many organizations that are for the empowerment of women. However, my organization, which is still under process, is led by the grassroots, basically, movement. And in addition to that, we've actually, we have a lot of podcasts in the UAE that talks about, you know, discrimination, sexism, gender rights, sex education. I would say that feminism in the UAE and across the Gulf mainly takes place on social media. And if you look at that, you'd be absolutely, you know, mind blown by how, you know, futuristic and progressive these feminist movements are in the UAE and across the Gulf as well.
How do you see when you're watching and you're seeing what is happening in the last 10 years in your country, and you look to the future and you say to yourself, okay, what is the next step? Is the next step going to put me as a woman, as a Muslim woman, in a different position in 10 years? Maybe my daughter will be in a different position in 10 years.
Definitely. I mean, if I remember how things were 10 years ago, we needed like a guardian consent for everything. But I mean,
Wow.
I was sent abroad to study for both my bachelor's and my master's by my government. Our government is constantly encouraging women to take up STEM positions, you know, to take up leadership positions. And if someone were simply to say something like, oh, I don't want to work for her because she's a woman, we do not tolerate that. And a lot of, if you look at, for example, the cabinet today, you know, we have a lot of women ministers. We have a lot of women in the parliament as well. I believe there's a 50% quota. And with time, this becomes more and more normalized, and you'll see more and more women in leadership positions. So definitely in 10 years, I see the UAE being one of the most progressive and feminist countries in the entire region, if not the world.
So I will ask you a more geopolitical question about what is happening in the rest of the Arab world. Do you think that what happened with the UAE and maybe the talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel, do you think that it's the beginning of a new wave towards Israel, like from what you're watching? Because we're also hearing about talks between Israel and Lebanon. For us, watching it from here, like watching it from Israel, as people who are living in Israel, it feels like it's the new Middle East that people were talking about for so many years.
From my personal point of view, I think, once again, that it's difficult to have a new Middle East without resolving the Palestinian conflict. And that's a sentiment shared by a lot of Arabs. Mm-hmm. You clearly have the governments reacting or acting in whatever ways that they deem fit for their national interest. Like the UAE normalizing with Israel was a big step for the UAE's national interest. But you also have the people. And for the people to become more accepting of Israel, more accepting of what's to come in the new Middle East, it's very important for us to keep Palestine in the head of, or like in the top of the discussion. Because like I know a lot of Emiratis who might not be very vocal, but who are still concerned about what this means for Palestine. But definitely, if that's resolved in the coming years, hopefully it is, I do see the world and I do see the Middle East becoming more and more open to Israel. I mean, who doesn't want to go to Jerusalem? You know, who doesn't want to go to Tel Aviv? Who doesn't want to go to Ramallah, even in Palestine? These are areas that for the longest time have been very out of reach for us. You know, I know for a fact that I want to go to Nablus and have kunafa, like proper kunafa, because that's a dream of mine personally.
It's amazing that you know that the proper knafe is in Nablus and not in any other place in Israel or in the West Bank. You know, it's amazing that you know that. Basically, I'm coming from Nazareth, so I will always say that the best knafe is in Nazareth. But to say the truth, it's actually the best knafe is definitely in Nablus. I also, you know, my dream was to. I will tell you another problem that we have here in Israel. Unfortunately, most of our viewers. And the fact that 20% of the society in Israel is Arab society, most of Israeli Jews don't understand Arabic. We should have done this conversation that we're doing between two Arab Muslim women in Arabic, but we're doing it in English because some of our viewers are asking me why you're not speaking with her in Arabic. So I wanted to speak with you in Arabic, but I also wanted this conversation will reach to as many people as we can. كان حلمي ومناي إنه أحكي معاكي بالعربي وأعمل هاي المقابلة بالعربي. كان لي الشرف أحكي معاكي وأتكلم معاكي يعني بأكمل الكلمة اللي أنا بقدر أحكيها. بس مش متأكدة إنه أغلب الناس اللي عم بتطلع علينا إسا رح تفهم الحكي اللي أنا بحكيه. بس يسلموا إيديكي ويسلموا تمك وبتمنى لك كل التوفيق اللي بقدر أتمناه لنفسي بتمناه لإلك. يسلموا إيديكي.
مشكورة وأشكركم for having me. يعني كانت محادثة ممتعة جدا.
تسلموا. بستناكي هون بتل أبيب عشان أخذك هيك نطلع مع بعض على القدس أو ناكل الكنافة بنابلس.
إن شاء الله, definitely. Kunafa in Nablus sounds amazing.
It's on me. It's on me.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. And I hope that we will have you here again with us.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.